Chapter 9 introduces us to algebra in the terms of what algebra is in the early elementary and middle school years. So, algebra is the study of the structure of arithmetic and the ways to use that structure to describe certain situations and to solve problems. So, we can develop this structure mathematically by looking at growing or repeating patterns. We've already done a little bit of this in Chapter 7 when we looked at ratios and the constant proportionality. We're going to study functions, what we put in, what we get out. We can also solve problems that can be formulated with an equation. So the value of this is if we have something that is happening over and over again, if we have an equation, we can use it to predict. We're going to study aspects of algebra that are useful in the elementary school setting and some middle school. The first thing we need to do is we need to define some terms. 9.1 looks mostly at numeric expressions. So that's simply a meaningful string of numbers and operations. So you need addition, subtraction, multiplication or division, or raising to a power. But there's no equal sign, simply an expression that describes what a picture looks like, what a pattern looks like. It does not need to be solved. So in the early grades, we talk about simple expressions, numeric expressions like 2 plus 3, or 3 times 5, or 35 divided by 7, which we can also look at as an improper fraction, 35 divided by 7. So these are all examples of the early grades. Now, as we move up into the later grades and into middle school, we start looking at expressions that are more complicated. So we have 3 plus 7 times 2, 8 times 20 plus 4, and 35 minus 5 raised to the second power. In general, the second group of numeric expressions relies heavily on knowing the order of operations to evaluate what the expression is telling us. So we have to remember our order of operations. Now, most people remember this as PEMDAS. Well, what does PEMDAS really mean? Well, it tells us, it's a reminder that whenever we look at a numeric expression, that we need to look at the parentheses first, then exponents, then moving from left to right, we do multiplication and division at the same time, and then moving from left to right, we do addition and subtraction at the same time. The order of operations allows us to see how very similar looking numeric expressions can be evaluated to be quite different numbers. For example, if we have in parentheses 3 plus 7 times 2, that's quite different than 3 plus 7 times 2. In this first one, order of operations tells us that we must evaluate the parentheses first. So we're going to end up with 10 times 2, which means this numeric expression has a value of 20. Whereas if we go over here to this numeric expression, we're told that we must do multiplication and division first. So we have to address this 7 times 2. So we're going to end up with 3 plus 14. And that numeric expression is evaluated at 17. We can have the same number of terms, and they can be evaluated quite differently. Speaking of terms, we think of a term of an expression as those that are combined by addition, subtraction, or any combination of addition and subtraction. So, for example, up here, this 2 plus 3 has two terms. 3 plus 7 times 2 has two terms as well. You want to make sure that you pay attention to just the addition and the subtraction or combination of those. Let's take a look at an example. I suggest that you stop the video and try to evaluate this numeric expression on your own. When you're done, start it up again and we'll go through it. So when we look at a string of a number of terms like this, how many terms do we have in this numeric expression? The first thing we're going to do is we're going to look for our addition and subtraction sign. So this is a 3-term numeric expression. So this -1 here does not count as a term unless we actually use distributive property here instead of using the order of operations. If we use distributive property here, we're going to end up with the same answer, but it'll just be a couple more steps. However, let's look at this using strictly the order of operations. Order of operations tells us that the first thing that we should do is look at parentheses. So that means that we are going to rewrite this as 3 times 6 plus 84 divided by 2 minus 4 times 2 to the third power. Now we're going to look at exponents. So here's our exponent, and we're going to rewrite it as 3 times 6 plus 84 divided by 2 minus 4 times 8. So we end up with now a long string of 3 terms, and the next thing we need to do is multiplication or division. And we start at the left and we move to the right. So we're going to start here and we're going to move to the right. So we're going to end up with 18, 3 groups of 6, plus 84 divided by 2 is 42, minus 32. Now, the next thing we're looking at is addition and subtraction. So we're going to start again at the left and move to the right until we get to the end. Now, this is when it's good to remember that we also have some properties that will help us move these around. So we can actually move this around, the addition and subtraction signs, to make it easier for ourselves to do mental math. So now as we move from left to right, we can go 42 minus 32 is 10, plus 18. We evaluate this as 28. So 9.1 is all about looking at numeric expressions and trying to draw pictures of those or create situations that correspond to numeric expressions.